Picture this. It is a cold, brittle night, high above the tree line. The moon casts these silver shadows on the massive snow-packed slopes of the Himalaya. And then suddenly, a sound cuts through the silence. A high, carrying cry. It's not geological. It's not an animal as you know it. The Sherpa porter beside you, he just stops, bows his head slightly in, I don't know, respect, or maybe fear, and he whispers one word, Yeti.
That atmosphere you just said, it's not just for drama, it's essential. That is exactly where this mystery lives, right at that intersection of the physical world and, the spiritual boundary. Today, our mission, our deep dive, is to step right into that realm. We're going to follow those mysterious footprints across folklore, across deep spiritual traditions, and the frozen passes to ask a simple question that has 1,000 answers. What is the Yeti, this wild man of the eternal snows? And why, despite, massive scientific effort, does this legend absolutely refuse to melt away?
And we have stacked the sources high for this one. We're looking at decades of mountaineer accounts, cryptid investigations. We've got these unsettling local tales from figures like Lama Dorje, and then the really profound spiritual testimonies from ascetics like Sri M. We are seeking knowledge that lies right at the threshold of the known world. And for this entire deep dive, we are maintaining a belief meter, a state of high intrigue, at, let's say, a solid 65%. This story is just too rich in contradiction to dismiss entirely, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's crucial we approach this with respect for the local narrative. For the people who live within sight of Everest and Makalu, this isn't some modern invention or a tabloid monster. Before the West ever arrived with cameras and plaster casts, the Yeti was already deeply integrated into the cosmology of the region. It was a reality that's physical, spiritual, and moral, all at the same time.
Okay, so let's unpack the Yeti's identity, starting with the language. What's fascinating to me is that across the valleys of Nepal, Tibet, Bhutan, you have so many names, but they all seem to point toward the same concept. A powerful, elusive, hairy presence in the mountains.
Indeed. And the most common name we use, Yeti, is actually a simplification. It comes from the Tibetan term Ji-ya dread.
Yeah.
And that literally translates to rocky bear. That name alone immediately anchors the creature to its habitat. It suggests something rugged and massive living among the seracs, the ice falls.
But that's just one identity in a whole taxonomy of these creatures.
Right. If you move from Tibet toward the Sherpa regions, you'll encounter the name Mishe, which means man-bear. And then there's the term Migoi or Migo, which is translated most plainly as just wild man. These different names, these linguistic variations, they tell us that the local culture recognizes a creature that's, it's blurring the lines. It's not purely animal, but it's not quite human either.
And then you have Zute. What does that one refer to?
So Zute is often used to refer to the Himalayan brown bear, the cattle bear. And the fact that locals have these distinct names for different large, hairy mountain mammals suggests they're categorizing them very carefully. It's not just one big, scary monster.
Which brings us to the name that made it famous globally, the Abominable Snowman. And that, as it turns out, is a classic example of cultural transmission gone spectacularly wrong.
Oh, it's perhaps the most infamous journalistic blunder in the history of cryptozoology. It all goes back to 1921. It happened during Colonel Charles Howard Bury's reconnaissance expedition to Everest. When his guides found these massive tracks at 20,000 feet, they attributed them to the Meto Kanmi.
Okay, so let's break that down. Meto Kangmi, what does that actually mean?
Meto translates essentially as man-bear, and Kangmi is snowman. So the original term was simply the man-bear snowman. But when a journalist named Henry Newman received the accounts back in Calcutta, he either misheard or mistranslated the first part of the term. He substituted the accurate Meto, the man-bear, with mech, which is a word that doesn't even exist. He then incorrectly translated that as filthy or dirty.
Okay, so filthy snowman doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
Not at all. So Newman decided to maximize the drama, and he just replaced filthy with a far more sensational term, abominable.
So the monster that caught the world's attention was literally christened Abominable because a journalist thought man-bear snowman wasn't catchy enough. That's an editorial decision that launched 1,000 expeditions.
It absolutely transformed the creature. It went from being a local, respected enigma into a global monster hunt. But to truly understand the Yeti, you have to look beyond that monster hunt. And here's where it gets really deeply interesting. The Yeti isn't just a cryptid or an unknown animal in this region. It holds a very specific, very sacred role within Tibetan Buddhist, even the older bone traditions.
The spiritual context really elevates the whole discussion, doesn't it? In our Western eyes, it's a biological puzzle to be solved. But in the Himalayas, it seems to be an element of the spiritual landscape itself.
Exactly. The local perspective holds that the Yeti is not merely a wild animal. It is viewed as both a physical entity and a spiritual one. Some legends suggest the creature sometimes follows the Dharma, the principles of Tibetan Buddhist traditions, and that its very existence reinforces the ethical framework of mountain living. You hear stories from monks and seasoned hermits, tales of being aided by these powerful mountain beings,
So they're not always fearsome, they can be guardians.
protectors of sacred passes, watchers at the edges of Shambhala and the fabled Shangri-La. They're gatekeepers.
And I understand that in Tibetan Buddhist art and bone traditions, there's even a whole metaphysical realm that exists between the pure animal form and the perfected human form. That's where this kind of being resides, right?
It's the concept of the liminal being. It exists at the edge of the known and the unknown. And this duality, it explains the creature's complex taxonomy within Tibetan lore. They aren't looking for one singular animal, but rather different types or, manifestations.
Let's break down those types because the sources are remarkably consistent in classifying them by size and by temperament.
Yeah, there are generally three main varieties mentioned. The largest and fiercest is the Nyalmo. This is a truly enormous figure, standing around 15 feet tall with black fur. The Nyalmo are said to be incredibly rare, and they primarily reside in the most desolate, highest altitude areas.
And then there's a mid-sized one.
That's the Chuti. It's closer to 8 feet tall, and it's associated with mid-altitudes, maybe between 8,000 and 10,000 feet. Still very formidable, but less mythicized than the Nyalmo.
And the third, the smallest one.
That would be the Rengshim Bombo. This one is the most manageable in size, ranging from 3 to 5 feet tall, and it's distinguished by its reddish-brown fur. The variation in these accounts, the size, the color, the elevation, it suggests a deep inherited knowledge passed down through generations. It really indicates a familiarity with various large, wild, mountain-dwelling creatures, or perhaps varying degrees of spiritual manifestation.
This level of detail suggests it's not just a fuzzy outline of some beast. It's a highly specific part of their natural and spiritual world, and it often functions as an enforcer or a gatekeeper of the high places.
And that connects directly to the sanctity of the wilderness. They are protectors, yes, but they can also be fierce punishers of those who trespass or violate the sanctity of the high places without the proper respect or intention.
So, to talk about secrets, we really have to talk about the landscape that keeps them. The Yeti's home turf is the Himalayan mountain range, a staggering expanse covering Nepal, Tibet, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. Let's really map out this habitat.
We need to properly convey the scale here. I mean, we are not talking about a wooded nature preserve. This is the highest and one of the most rugged mountain ranges on Earth. It has dozens of peaks over 25,000 feet. And the majority of significant sightings, including that famous evidence like the Shipton photo, they're reported at extreme altitudes, often between 17,000 and 20,000 feet above sea level. This is the realm of perpetual snow, of ice falls, and what climbers call the death zone.
That inaccessibility is the key, isn't it? It's why the mystery endures. The terrain itself acts as this massive natural defense mechanism.
It is the ultimate natural fortress. Just consider the geographical reasons why a large, rare mammal could remain plausible here. The region is rife with these deep, hidden valleys, vast glaciers, and chaotic crevasse fields. It's largely uninhabited by humans. So the odds of just running into an elusive creature or setting up a long-term monitoring station are vanishingly small.
And the challenge isn't just about the scale, it's about the conditions. The extreme altitude affects everything. The air is thin, visibility can drop to zero in a whiteout storm, and your own human endurance is constantly being tested.
Absolutely. The thin air, the constant threat of avalanche, and the sheer physical effort it takes to move just a few miles, it limits witnesses severely. Any search or investigation is automatically compromised by the environment itself. Even if you do encounter something, your focus is primarily on survival, not on, whipping out a camera and getting perfect documentation.
I want to focus on that preservation of secrets. The difficulty of discovery is precisely what keeps these stories alive. The mountain range remains a vast, largely unknown entity to us.
And you have to think about the concept of nivation and ice dynamics. The terrain is always moving, snow is constantly melting, reforming, refreezing, and this dynamism means that even seemingly clear evidence, like a perfect track in the snow, it's quickly distorted or elongated or just erased within hours. This geographical instability makes definitive, repeatable evidence nearly impossible to collect.
And even with all our modern technology, satellite imaging, drones, high-resolution thermal optics, we still haven't been able to definitively inventory every deep valley or high-altitude cave system.
No, the cost and the logistical nightmare of sustaining an effective surveillance operation at 18,000 feet for a prolonged period is it's prohibitive. While we've explored the famous peaks, the vast snowfields and glacial expanses in between remain a library, with many books still sealed, which, supports the local belief systems that hold the mountains as these sacred, secret places.
And it makes sense that if only the most experienced climbers or dedicated ascetics are spending prolonged, isolated time in these high places, their unusual encounters gain immense weight. They are the primary witnesses because they are the only ones surviving long enough up there to observe anything. All right, let's move to the evidence that really fuels the legend, the consistent physical accounts. The enduring puzzle of the Yeti, much like Bigfoot, is that witnesses across vast distances with no prior contact offer a remarkably similar description of a large bipedal hominid.
The composite sketch is extremely detailed and specific. We were talking about a figure that's typically 6 to over 8 feet tall. It's covered in thick hair that spans colors, brown, dark gray, or a reddish brown. And the structure is unequivocally described as ape-like, but adapted for standing and walking upright.
One of the most compelling early accounts came from Sławomir Rawicz, a Polish army lieutenant. He claimed to have seen two of them back in 1940. And he didn't just describe their height, he noted a very specific anatomical feature.
Yes, Rawicz emphasized that their arms were unusually long. They swung so low that the wrists reached the level of their knees. That is a classic feature of a large, non-human primate. He also insisted that they walked entirely bipedally. That detail, the long arm swing, is just too specific to be dismissed as a simple misidentification of a bear.
And the consistency continues with features above the neck. The spiritual leader, Sri M., who encountered the creature at extremely close range, described the face as broader and bigger than a human face. Other accounts often mention a distinct, almost cone-shaped head.
It's this consistency that generates that 65% intrigue we talked about. And beyond the visual, witnesses consistently report distinct sensory beats, the vocalizations, and yes, the smell.
The auditory evidence is key, particularly from those major expeditions. The 1953 Everest expedition, led by Sir John Hunt, reported hearing this howling noise at night. Their Sherpas immediately identified it as the Yeti. It was a high whistle, a single scream, or a carrying howl that just echoed uniquely through the high passes.
Later investigations tried to classify these sounds. One team in Nepal played a recording of a suspected Yeti vocalization to some local elders, and one of them, a man named Ang Kring, immediately confirmed it was the exact noise he had heard decades prior. The consistent nature of these vocalizations and the fact that similar, unique sounds are reported for Sasquatch across the Pacific, it suggests a distinct, shared form of communication rather than just confused animal calls.
And we can't overlook the odor. Shriyam described smelling a musk-like wet fur, like a dog coming near. That foul, musky stench is a sensory signature tied to almost every large, hairy hominid report worldwide, from the Yowie to Bigfoot.
And these signs, they all culminate in the most iconic piece of evidence of all, the footprint. These unexplained tracks are what launched the global frenzy.
The centerpiece, of course, is Eric Shipton's 1951 photograph. It was taken at 20,000 feet. It shows this massive print clearly compared against the tip of an ice axe for scale. The structure was what startled the world. Broad, with a distinct big toe area and 3 smaller digits. This image absolutely cemented the Yeti in the global consciousness.
And that phenomenon is still happening today. In 2019, an Indian Army patrol near Makalu Base Camp logged massive, unusual footprints in the snow. They recorded the tracks measured an astonishing 32 inches long by 15 inches wide. Now, we have to treat military reports neutrally. They simply registered something unusual. But the fact that the tracks continue to surface in the same desolate, high-altitude environments, it's a modern note in a very old song.
It just reinforces the reality that something large and bipedal is moving through the highest passes. Now, whether that something is an undiscovered primate or a known animal distorted by snow is the question, but the physical sign is consistent.
And we have to return to the close-range encounters. Like Nori Sherpa's near miss, he saw this dark gray, 6-foot figure just 15 feet away on a bend in the trail. These are accounts of sheer isolated terror, not staged events. He dropped his basket of potatoes and fled. The creature fled in the opposite direction. Yeah. That suggests a wild creature, wary and surprised, not some fictional boogeyman.
So now we transition from the physical tracking to the spiritual terrain. The Yeti's liminal status, existing at the boundary of the natural and the sacred, it explains the powerful duality of the creature in local lore. It can be a benevolent provider one minute and a merciless sentinel the next.
That duality speaks volumes about the Tibetan and Sherpa understanding of nature itself. Nature isn't benign, it's powerful, it's sacred, and it's dangerous. The Yeti embodies this complexity.
On the benevolent side, you have these accounts of the Yeti as a guide or a provider to those on a spiritual path. Let's revisit Sri M's testimony.
Sri M, the spiritual leader, recounted this extraordinary event. He was high in the Himalayas, near death from a high fever, when a huge, furry person entered his tent. The being, without speaking, physically stuffed this potent, bitter herbal medicine into his mouth. The Yeti then just vanished. Sri M recovered, and his guru later affirmed that the Yeti was a good person and not to be feared.
That narrative places the Yeti not just as an animal, but as a being possessing some kind of esoteric knowledge, specifically advanced herbal medicine. And it acts as a guardian for those who are pure of heart.
It implies that the creature operates outside the ordinary world. It's a spiritual operative. The Yeti, in this context, is a protector of ascetics and a helper to those who respect the mountain's rules.
But then you have the terrifying opposite, the Yeti as the merciless sentinel of taboo zones. Lama Dorje shared this chilling piece of folklore about the Yeti kidnapping a village girl. And this story establishes a far darker, predatory role.
The folklore is indeed profoundly unsettling, and it provides insight into the deepest fears associated with the wild. The legend states the Yeti took this girl to a cave, and in a horrifying attempt to assimilate her into the wild, inserted a thin piece of wood into the back of her head. The purpose? To change her mind and make her forget about her home. It's an act of psychological severance, literally trying to turn her into a wild thing.
And when the villagers tracked them down, the Yeti was furious, growling to protect its prize. The villagers had to use a very clever yet desperate tactic to defeat the creature.
Right. Because of the Yeti's long, thick hair, they tricked him. They used kerosene and water, which led to the Yeti setting himself on fire and running off to die. But the true horror, the detail that makes this more than just a campfire story, is what the villagers found in the cave once the creature was gone.
The sheer shot of finding a large box full of human heads. That detail firmly establishes the Yeti as a terrifying predatory entity that enforces sacred boundaries with lethal force. It's the bouncer of the mountain temple.
That's the perfect analogy. The Yeti, whether it's benevolent or murderous, is intrinsically linked to this concept of boundaries. The fierceness in these legends links the creature directly to the protection of Bayul, the hidden valleys. These are often described as sacred, utopian refuges, inaccessible to all but the spiritually or morally pure. The Yeti's role is to instill fear and reverence, ensuring that trespassers respect the sacred order of the mountains.
So if the mountains are temples, the Yeti is either the quiet monk that gives you tea, or the bouncer who makes sure you never leave if you break the rules. It's a powerful cultural tool for regulating behavior in a lethal environment.
The Yeti is not an anomaly. It's part of a global, recurring archetype. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Yeti simply wears frost, while others wear cedar shadows or desert scrub. The consistency across global cryptids is truly one of the most compelling arguments for either a universal human fear or maybe a globally dispersed relict hominid population.
We all know the North American iteration, Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It shares the Yeti size, the upright gait, the general structure, often sighted deep in the Pacific Northwest rainforests and cedar shadows.
And that comparison extends to the sensory experiences. As we noted, some investigators found similar vocalizations reported in Nepal to those recorded in the dense wilderness of North America. It's a recurring biological fingerprint.
And if you travel south to Australia, the Yowie myth shares these striking characteristics. It's described as a towering, nocturnal creature with dark fur and, famously, a foul stench. The description aligns almost perfectly with the American Bigfoot and the Himalayan Yeti, just adapted to the harsh Australian environment.
Even in the frigid expanse of Siberia, you have the tuchuna. This creature is described as 6 to 7 feet tall, covered with dark hair, and sometimes specifically characterized as Neanderthal-like. Again, the same size, the same bipedal stance, the same sense of elusiveness, just across the steppes instead of the high passes.
So whether these sightings represent a single, globally dispersed species of highly adaptable relict hominid, or whether they are simply a universal psychological expression of humanity's deepest, most primal fear of the truly unexplored wilderness, the result is the same. Every region has a powerful, elusive figure.
It's the language of the unknown. These legends express humanity's relationship with the wilderness, reminding us that there are still massive parts of the Earth that resist our mapping and classification. Ours wears frost.
The global reaction to that Shipton photo in 1951 was immediate and massive. It transformed the local legend into a global scientific obsession, leading to some truly bizarre, well-funded, and highly publicized expeditions. This wasn't just curiosity, this was a formal international hunt.
The resources dedicated were incredible. I mean, consider the famous 1957 expedition bankrolled by the Texas oil man Tom Slick. This was a serious, expensive effort, and it prompted official governmental reaction.
You're referring to the fact that Slick actually secured official U.S. government guidelines for hunting the Yeti? I still can't get over that.
It speaks to the height of the craze. These official guidelines stipulated that the expedition had to obtain a Nepalese permit, which cost a massive 5,000 rupees back then, and that the Yeti was not to be harmed unless in self-defense. And crucially, the Nepalese government had to approve any news before it was published. The possibility of finding a massive unknown primate was treated as a matter of global security and scientific prestige.
But what did all this fevered official searching actually yield? A collection of physical relics that generated massive headlines, but, well, they ultimately proved problematic under scientific scrutiny.
The two most famous relics are the Kumjung scalp and the Pangboche hand. They are the epitome of high intrigue meeting eventual disappointment.
Let's start with the scalp.
In 1960, Sir Edmund Hillary, the co-conqueror of Everest, he borrowed the supposed Yeti scalp from the Kumjung monastery. He literally took it on a globe-trotting tour, hoping to validate the mystery. However, subsequent examinations in major institutions in London, Chicago, and Paris found that the relic was expertly molded, likely through heat and pressure, from the skin of a serow, a type of goat antelope. It was a cultural artifact, not primate evidence.
And the Pangboche hand has a Hollywood plotline that is far more entertaining than its biological reality.
Oh, the story is pure Cold War intrigue mixed with celebrity glamour. In 1959, a piece of a mummified hand was acquired from a monastery near Pangboche. Initial examination by primatologist William Charles Osmond Hill suggested the structure was unusual, possibly resembling a Neanderthal. And to get it out of the country for serious testing, actor James Stewart's wife, Gloria, became the smuggler.
She smuggled a presumed Yeti hand.
Yes, she successfully smuggled the relic out of India, hidden cleverly in her lingerie case, avoiding customs inspection, which was looking for drugs or jewels, not ancient mummified hands. This relic was examined repeatedly over the decades.
And what was the final definitive verdict on that famously smuggled hand?
Later, much more sophisticated DNA analysis confirmed that the bones were definitively human. So the two primary physical relics that fueled the early mania, the scalp and the hand, were debunked as either a misidentified goat or human remains.
The mystery should have dissolved right there, but it didn't. Why are we still talking about the Yeti if the physical evidence brought back by these major expeditions was largely fake or misidentified?
Because the searches occasionally yielded material that defied easy explanation, and the local stories continued. We have those recurring lines of isolated unknown vocalizations heard at altitude sounds that do not match known bear or snow leopard calls. Furthermore, that 1959 fecal analysis from Tom Slick's expedition found an unclassified parasite. If the Yeti were simply a known animal like a bear, the parasite should have been classifiable.
And most compellingly, we have to return to the sheer consistency of the eyewitness accounts, the broad face, the cone head, the long arms, coming from people like Rawaj, Shriem, and local Sherpas who were isolated and had no contact with one another. It forces the question, what are they all seeing and describing so similarly?
The fact that modern tools, including thermal imaging and satellite reconnaissance, have failed to produce conclusive, repeatable proof, it actually reinforces the mystery. The mountain's too vast, too complex, and too difficult to survey for a definitive biological inventory. The difficulty of discovery sustains the intrigue.
All right, now we enter the realm of speculation for the believers. For those 65% of us who believe something physical made those prints and emitted those sounds, we have three main zoological or theoretical possibilities for what that something might be.
This is where we move beyond folklore and start to apply evolutionary science to the legend. Possibility 1 is the most straightforward, an undiscovered modern primate.
A rare, high-altitude ape or relict hominid, highly adapted to the cold. How feasible is that, zoologically speaking?
It is zoologically possible, though. Highly unlikely given the environmental extremes. We would hypothesize a creature that has become highly specialized to high-altitude survival. Perhaps it leverages resources in the deep, low-altitude valleys during the worst weather, but it remains above the tree line where it's least likely to encounter humans. It would be naturally reclusive by necessity due to critically low numbers. The hypothesis suggests there is nothing fundamentally wrong with the idea of a large, hairy ape surviving in such remote, challenging wilderness.
So a creature related to gorillas or chimpanzees, but uniquely adapted to the thin air and extreme cold, maybe with a thicker coat and a different metabolic rate.
Exactly. It would be an apex, high-altitude specialist surviving on the very edge of detection.
Possibility 2 takes us much further back in time and introduces the specter of the biggest ape to ever live, Gigantopithecus.
This theory has tremendous resonance because the descriptions of the Yeti often match the estimated size of this colossal, extinct primate. Gigantopithecus is known from fossil evidence, primarily these huge molars like the one found in a Hong Kong pharmacy in 1935, initially labeled dragon's tooth, which indicate a massive creature. Estimates suggest it stood up to 10 feet tall and weighed perhaps 1,200 pounds.
A 10-foot, 1,200-pound ape certainly fits the description of that towering Nyalmo variety in Tibetan lore. So what's the theory of its survival?
Most scientists believe Gigantopithecus went extinct several 100,000 years ago in Southeast Asia. However, the survival theory posits that a small, isolated population migrated north and survived in the remote, high-altitude environments of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. They would have adapted and critically evolved into a more bipedal form to move efficiently across snow and uneven mountain terrain. The sheer size of the tracks sometimes found is perfectly matched by the potential foot size of a creature of this scale.
That's a powerful connection between paleoanthropology and modern myth. But we have to also address possibility 3, which blends the physical search with the spiritual reality, the liminal manifestation.
And this returns us to the cultural context. Drawing heavily on the stories of Sri Nem and Lama Dorje, this theory suggests the Yeti is a phenomenon that manifests at cultural and geographic thresholds. It's a non-physical, or perhaps semi-physical entity, a representation recognized by the human mind where the truly wild places meet spiritual isolation. The Yeti becomes the expression of the mountain's consciousness or some higher elemental being.
And this would explain the dramatic contradictions in its behavior. Why one person encounters a benevolent guide who provides life-saving medicine, while another encounters a murderous bouncer who collects human heads. The manifestation adapts to the observer's moral status or their intention.
It elevates the discussion beyond biology and into metaphysics. It reflects the Tibetan cosmology, where the boundaries between objective reality and perceived reality are far thinner than we typically accept in the West. It is the mountain itself made manifest.
To maintain intellectual honesty, we must now turn to the scientific consensus, which points overwhelmingly to a mundane, identifiable explanation for the vast majority of physical evidence.
Bears.
This is the critical juncture. The overwhelming scientific conclusion is that the Yeti phenomenon is primarily rooted in the misidentification of regional bears, specifically the Himalayan brown bear, Ursus arctos isablinus, or the Asiatic black bear, Zostus tibetanus. These are large, powerful animals capable of impressive feats. And we should note that even famous Yeti proponents like Reinhold Messner, the legendary mountaineer who claimed to know the Yeti exists, he ultimately concluded that the creature he saw was actually the endangered Himalayan brown bear, which can stand and walk upright for significant distances.
And that biological sense has been confirmed by modern genetics. We need to elaborate on the hard data here. The largest, most authoritative genetic study was conducted in 2017, led by Dr. Charlotte Lindquist at the University of Buffalo.
What exactly did Dr. Lindquist's team do, and what were the findings?
Her team analyzed 9 samples alleged Yeti, hair, bone, and scat collected from museums and private collections, including relics assumed to be from the creature. They used mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, which is useful for tracing maternal lineage. The result was definitive. Almost all the samples attributed to the Yeti matched regional bear species. Specifically, they matched the Himalayan brown bear and the Himalayan black bear. Only one sample matched a domestic dog.
So the DNA evidence, the most stringent scientific test we have, points squarely at known wildlife. But how does a bear create a track that looks like a huge bipedal human foot?
This is the crux of the footprint puzzle, and it comes down to 2 primary mechanisms. Firstly, bears, particularly when they're crossing obstacles or scenting the air, can stand or walk bipedally for short periods. And that creates an upright, oddly human-like print.
But the real mechanism that creates that massive distorted shape has to be the snow itself.
Absolutely crucial. It's called the overstepping phenomenon combined with nivation. When a bear walks, it often places its hind foot directly on top of or slightly in front of the print left by its forefoot. This action creates one single, elongated, and dramatically distorted print that appears bipedal and non-bear-like, hiding the four-footed gait.
And then the environmental sculpting happens?
Correct. The phenomenon of nivation, the wind, the temperature fluctuations, the melting, it takes that initial distorted bear print and sculpts it into something entirely ambiguous. The edges melt, the center sinks, and what might have been 6 distinct pads and claws becomes smoothed out, looking like a massive, five-toed human foot. Daniel C. Taylor, a longtime researcher, showed through comprehensive analysis that Eric Shipton's iconic 1951 print matched a black bear paw when you account for exactly this type of snow distortion.
That makes the forensic case for the bear incredibly strong, especially since Taylor even located a previously unpublished Shipton photo that included scratches clearly identifying bear nail marks near the track.
The scientific verdict is powerful. However, we must return to our 65% intrigue meter. If the samples and the footprints are explained, why do we keep the door open?
Because the Himalaya is a library with many books still sealed.
Precisely. Samples can be misleading. Not every valley has been surveyed, and not every hair has been analyzed. While we've confirmed that almost all analyzed samples are bears, that doesn't account for the highly consistent descriptions of non-bear-like features, the long arms, the specific vocalizations, from isolated witnesses who weren't trying to get rich or famous. The absence of a body is not the proof of absence, and the sheer scale of the environment leaves a sliver of possibility for the unknown.
The science demands skepticism, but the environment supports the possibility. That's the tension that keeps the deep dive going.
Ultimately, whether the Yeti is fur and bone or myth and mind, the idea of it performs crucial cultural, ethical, and practical work in the world. Its function in local culture may be more important than its biology.
That is the essential insight here. We focus so much on the search, we forget to analyze the importance of the story itself. So what is the ethical function of this myth?
It plays a profound ecological and ethical role in a landscape that's facing modern pressures. The Yeti myth is a powerful cultural conservation tool. It actively protects sacred mountains and high-altitude areas from reckless trespass. If you believe a massive, fierce, spiritual guardian is watching the slopes, you're going to approach that landscape with immense humility and respect.
It effectively gives a voice to the land itself, making the mountain an active agent in the lives of the people who live there, dictating their behavior.
It instills humility in the thin air, which is a life-saving trait. It organizes caution, proper route finding, and immense respect for the wildlife that endures such harsh conditions.
Yeah.
When a Sherpa advises you to leave an offering at a high pass or warns against defiling a certain area, they are reinforcing centuries of ethical behavior rooted in reverence for the wild, often enforced by the threat of the Yeti.
So the Yeti organizes caution, route finding, and conservation. It's a way for human culture to understand that there are boundaries, both ecological and spiritual, that should not be crossed.
Absolutely. For many conservationists, the Yeti symbolizes a missing link, not biologically, but culturally. It's a connection between the domesticated human and the original wild human. It represents the untamed nature that we are constantly trying to control but must ultimately respect. The story of the Yeti ensures that the high places remain treated as temples, not playgrounds.
So whether the Yeti is a Gigantopithecus, a particularly large specialized bear, or a spectral guardian, the story itself is doing powerful, important work by reinforcing those critical ecological and spiritual boundaries.
It is the ultimate expression of the sublime and the untouchable wild. So here we stand at the edge of the snowfield. We have decades of powerful scientific evidence pointing toward known biology, a misidentified bear, a goat scalp, human bones. Yet we are haunted by the centuries of consistent stories and inexplicable sensory encounters. Could a great undiscovered ape theoretically hide among the seracs and sky? Possibly. But could a great story walk beside us in the snow, guiding our steps and reminding us of the wild, even when we cannot see the creature itself? Absolutely.
The earth is ancient, our instruments are young, and the Himalaya keeps its counsel. Until the ice gives up its final secrets, listen for that high whistle on the ridge, watch the cornice, and leave an offering at the pass. Respect the mountain.
And we encourage you, our listener, to seek out and share legends from your own local regions that speak to the unknown wilderness, whether it's the Yowie of the bush or the Sasquatch in the cedar shadows, fostering both open-minded skepticism and cultural respect for the stories that shape our world. Well, that's the deepest part of the dive.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Yetis. Stay curious, stay grounded, and watch out for the next one.
Thank you.